The bright light of the studio hit Ethan's eyes as he stepped inside. Clutching his old, scratched keyboard against his chest, he could feel the weight of every stare in the room. A dozen people already watching, judging, whispering under their breath. His palms were sweaty, and his heart thumped so hard he was afraid they might hear it. The audition hall was large, cold, and filled with expensive instruments. Grand pianos gleamed under the lights, microphones stood tall, and the scent of polished wood mixed with perfume from other contestants. They were confident, laughing, checking their phones, wearing designer jackets. Ethan looked down at his faded jeans and worn sneakers and felt like a ghost in the wrong world. He found a quiet corner and set his keyboard on a metal stand. The paint on its edges was chipped, one of the keys slightly cracked, but it was his only treasure. The same instrument his late father had bought from a pawn shop years ago. His father used to call it their miracle machine, because even when they had no money for food, the keyboard's music kept them alive. "Number 32, Ethan Cole," a voice called. The sound echoed across the studio. Ethan took a deep breath and carried his instrument toward the judges' table. In the center sat Miles Kettering, a famous director and producer known for discovering stars. His silver hair gleamed under the lights and his sharp eyes scanned Ethan from head to toe. Miles had a reputation for being cruelly honest, and Ethan could feel that sharpness already cutting into him. Miles leaned back in his chair, one eyebrow raised. "What's that?" he asked, pointing lazily at Ethan's keyboard. "It's my piano, sir," Ethan said softly, his voice trembling. The room broke into laughter. Even one of the assistants chuckled. "You call that a piano?" Miles scoffed, his lips curling into a smirk. "Kid, this isn't a street show. This is a real audition." His words struck like knives, and a couple of contestants in the back exchanged smirks. Ethan's face burned red, and for a moment, he thought about walking out. He could almost hear his father's voice in his mind. Calm, steady. "Son, when they laugh at your piano, play until they cry from your music." Ethan swallowed hard, his throat dry. His fingers brushed the worn keys, each one familiar like an old friend. He glanced at the judges. Miles was still smirking, arms folded, ready to be entertained by a disaster. "Whenever you're ready," Miles said mockingly, tapping his pen on the table. The lights dimmed slightly, and for a moment silence filled the room. Ethan's heart felt like it was going to explode. He took another deep breath and closed his eyes. Everything else disappeared. The laughter, the cold stares, the whispers. He remembered his father's hands guiding his when he was just a kid, pressing keys in a small apartment with rain leaking through the roof. He remembered the first time they played together for coins on a busy street. How his father would say, "We don't play for fame. We play for hearts." Ethan's trembling fingers hovered over the keys. Then he began to play. The first note rang out, soft, shaky but full of emotion. The sound wasn't clean like the grand piano behind him. It was raw, rough, human, but there was something in it, something real. The air changed. People who had been whispering suddenly went quiet. The melody began to flow like water, slow and beautiful, carrying years of pain and hope. Every note told a story. It spoke of nights he'd gone hungry, days he'd played under bridges, the sound of the city mixing with his music. It spoke of his father's laughter before sickness took him away. It wasn't just a song, it was a confession. Miles stopped tapping his pen. His eyes narrowed, his smirk fading just slightly. He leaned forward, listening, trying to understand how this beat-up keyboard could make something so alive. Ethan didn't see him. He was lost in the rhythm, his hands moving faster now, his soul spilling through every note. The melody rose higher, stronger, filling the hall. It wasn't perfect. A few keys buzzed, one note cracked, but that imperfection made it beautiful. It sounded real, raw, full of heart. A light flickered in Ethan's eyes as he played. No longer scared, no longer the poor kid being laughed at. He was an artist, and this was his truth. When he finished, the last note hung in the air like a held breath. Then silence, the kind of silence that feels heavy, sacred, as if even the walls are afraid to speak. Ethan's hands hovered above the keys. He didn't dare look up. He thought maybe they hated it. Maybe they were too polite to laugh again, but then he slowly opened his eyes. Miles Kettering was staring at him, no smirk, no sarcasm, just quiet disbelief around the room. People exchanged glances, a few nodding slowly. For the first time that day, the director didn't have a clever remark. The man who had mocked Ethan's old keyboard sat in silence, his mind trying to process what he had just witnessed. And in that moment, Ethan realized something powerful. You don't need the best instrument to make people feel. You just need a story worth hearing, and his story had just begun. The laughter from that day followed Ethan long after the audition ended. It echoed in his mind as he walked home through the gray streets of Los Angeles. The sound of expensive car engines and city noise mixed with that cruel voice. "You call that a piano?" A line that burned deeper than any insult he'd ever heard. He reached his small apartment, the kind of place where the wallpaper peeled and the ceiling leaked when it rained. His old keyboard sat in the corner, the same one he had carried on buses, subways and sidewalks. It looked tired and keys yellowed, stickers peeling. But to him it wasn't just plastic and wires. It was a memory, a heartbeat, the last connection to his father. Ethan placed his fingers on the keys and played softly. The tune was the same one he had played during the audition, but now it sounded different, sadder, heavier, full of questions. He thought about how everyone in that room had laughed, how even the assistant with the clipboard smirked as he left. He told himself it didn't matter, but it did. Every note he played felt like an apology to himself, a way to ask why he ever thought he belonged there. His phone buzzed, and a message from his friend Leah. She had watched him practice for months. "How did it go?" she asked. Ethan stared at the screen, his thumbs hovering, then he typed, "They laughed at my piano," and set the phone down. He didn't want pity, he just wanted silence. Hours passed. The city lights blinked outside his window like distant stars. Ethan fell asleep beside his keyboard, his fingers still resting on the keys. The next morning, he woke up to a faint sound, a soft notification tone. He rubbed his eyes and saw a message from an unknown number. It read, "Meet me tomorrow at Kettering Studios, 9 a.m. His heart skipped. Miles Kettering, the same director who had humiliated him? He thought it must be a joke. He almost deleted the message, but then noticed something strange. It was from the studio's official number, the same place he had auditioned. Ethan didn't know what to think. Maybe they wanted to mock him again, or use his performance for a blooper reel. But something in him, the same stubborn spark his father had, whispered, "Go." He spent the whole night practicing. His fingers ached, his eyes burned, but he played until dawn. He didn't have a new keyboard, so he cleaned his old one, polished every corner, tightened every loose screw. When he looked at it again, he smiled. "We're not done yet," he whispered. At exactly 9, he stood outside the studio. His heart raced. He wore the same clothes, washed and ironed. But his expression was different. Calm and steady. Inside, the receptionist recognized him. "Room B," she said with a smile that was softer than before. When he entered, Miles Kettering was already there. Standing near a large grand piano, his assistant was beside him, but there were no cameras, no crowd, just silence. Miles looked at Ethan, his face unreadable. "You know," he began slowly, "I watched your audition again last night." Ethan froze. Not sure if that was a good thing or bad, Miles continued. Whatever it was you played, I couldn't stop thinking about it." He walked around the room, pacing. It wasn't polished, it wasn't perfect, but it was real. Ethan blinked, unsure what to say. The director who mocked him was now complimenting him. It didn't make sense. Miles turned to face him. "Play it again," he said quietly. Ethan hesitated. "On this piano?" he asked, glancing at the grand instrument that probably cost more than his entire building. Miles shook his head. "No, use yours." Ethan's heart tightened. He set up his small keyboard again, the same way he had during the audition. He could feel Miles's assistant watching curiously, like she couldn't believe the director was letting this happen. Then he began to play. This time he didn't play with fear. He played with purpose. The melody was richer, deeper. He added small improvisations, little flourishes his father had taught him. It filled the empty studio like sunlight through broken blinds. Miles closed his eyes, tapping his fingers on the table. Then halfway through the song, he stopped Ethan. "Wait," Miles said softly. "Do you have any idea what that feels like?" Ethan frowned, confused. "Feels like what, sir?" Miles's voice dropped. "That song. It feels like someone bleeding through the keys." For the first time, Ethan saw something human in the director's eyes. Not arrogance, but understanding. Miles turned toward his assistant. "Get me a recorder, we're not losing this," he said sharply. The assistant hurried out and Miles looked back at Ethan. "You said that piano was your father's?" Ethan nodded. Yes, he... Miles sighed, rubbing his temple. Then tell him, wherever he is, he just made me feel something I haven't felt in years. Ethan didn't know how to respond. His throat tightened. For months, he'd played on street corners, ignored by strangers, laughed at by judges, but now the same man who had crushed him was standing there, humbled, changed. It wasn't about revenge or pride anymore. It was about connection. When he finished the last note, Miles just stood there in silence. Then quietly he said, "I was wrong." The words hit harder than applause in that quiet studio. Ethan realized that sometimes the deepest victory doesn't come from shouting or fighting back. It comes from letting your truth speak louder than your pain. He packed his keyboard slowly, ready to leave. But before he could reach the door, Miles called out, "Ethan?" He turned. Miles smiled faintly. "Don't fix that piano. It's perfect the way it is," and for the first time, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Ethan walked out of Kettering Studios that morning, feeling like the world had quietly shifted beneath his feet. The same man who had humiliated him days ago now saw something in him. Something real. Something powerful. Yet Ethan couldn't quite believe it. He replayed Miles's words in his mind. "Don't fix that piano. It's perfect the way it is." They echoed in his chest like music. But the city didn't care about quiet miracles. The streets were the same. Loud horns, rushing crowds. People chasing dreams that didn't wait for anyone. Ethan took a deep breath and headed toward the subway. The weight of his keyboard dug into his shoulder, but this time it didn't feel heavy. It felt like armor. Back in his apartment, he sat down and opened his laptop. There was an email waiting. From the studio, it said, "Ethan Cole. Request for follow-up session, bring your keyboard. NDA enclosed." He blinked twice, unsure if he was dreaming. His hands trembled as he clicked reply. The next day he returned to the studio. This time, the guards knew his name. The receptionist smiled brighter. The assistant offered him coffee, small changes, but they meant everything. Inside, Miles was waiting with two other men. Both older, both dressed in suits, they looked like producers, the kind of people who could make or break a career. Miles motioned for Ethan to sit. "Ethan," Miles began, "these gentlemen are from Harmony Records. They heard your audition clip and the one from last week." Ethan froze. "Someone recorded that?" Miles nodded. "We keep backups of every audition, usually for review or training, but yours..." He glanced at the two producers. "Went viral on our internal servers. People kept asking who you were." One of the men leaned forward. "That song you played, it didn't sound like anything we've heard in years. Raw, honest, painful, people felt it." Ethan couldn't speak. His mind spun in disbelief. Just days ago he had been laughed at. Now they were using words like viral and honest. Miles continued, "We'd like to re-record it properly. Under better sound conditions," Ethan swallowed. "With my keyboard?" Miles grinned. "Of course, we're not touching your sound." That's the magic. For hours Ethan played while sound engineers surrounded him. They adjusted microphones, tweaked balances, and whispered to each other about texture and soul. The same cracked keys that once drew laughter now held a room of professionals spellbound. When the final take ended, the sound engineer removed his headphones slowly. "You don't hear that kind of emotion from perfect instruments," he said softly. "It sounds alive." Ethan smiled shyly. "It's all I've got." A week later, the clip leaked. Not by the studio, but by a janitor who had filmed the session secretly. The video was uploaded to social media under the title, "They Laughed at His Keyboard." Then he played this. Within hours, it exploded. Comments flooded in. "I'm crying. This is what real music sounds like. This isn't a performance. It's a confession. Someone give this man a record deal." Ethan woke up to hundreds of messages. Leah called him screaming through the phone. "You're trending. Ethan, you're literally trending." He rushed to check his face, his old keyboard, his trembling hands, and all over the internet. Millions of views in less than a day, but fame came fast and sharp. Reporters gathered outside his apartment. Some praised him. Others mocked the director's hypocrisy. Headlines read, "Street pianist shocks industry giant," and "Kettering's mocked musician becomes overnight star." Miles called him that afternoon. "You okay, kid?" Ethan hesitated. "I think so, it's just..." "A lot," Miles chuckled. "Welcome to the real stage. Son, people will love you, hate you, and try to own you, and all in the same day." He paused, then added, "But remember, The only thing that matters is the truth behind your music. Don't let them polish it away. That night, Ethan sat alone with his keyboard again. His phone buzzed nonstop and offers from talk shows, sponsors, and magazines. Yet the noise didn't reach his heart. He touched the keys gently, whispering to the old instrument, "We did it, Dad." The next morning, Miles invited him back. This time, the studio looked different. Bigger, filled with camera crews, publicists, and lighting setups. On a large screen behind the glass, Ethan's viral clip played on loop. People clapped when he walked in. Miles approached him with a small envelope. "This," he said, handing it over, "is your first recording contract." Ethan's eyes widened. He ran his fingers over the paper. His name printed in bold letters. Ethan Cole, exclusive artist agreement. Miles smiled. "You earned it." But before Ethan could speak, a familiar face appeared behind the camera. One of the contestants from his first audition, the one who had laughed the loudest. She looked pale, uneasy. When their eyes met, she mouthed, "I'm sorry." Ethan didn't respond. He didn't need to. The music had already said everything. As they set up for the live recording, Miles whispered, "You know, when I first saw you walk in, I thought you were a joke." Ethan chuckled softly. "You weren't wrong." Miles shook his head. "No, I was blind." When Ethan began to play, the entire room fell silent again. The same melody filled the air. This time smoother, stronger, carried by thousands of hearts watching online. Miles stood behind the camera, his expression unreadable, but his eyes glistened slightly, and as the final note faded, Ethan looked up and realized something deeper than fame or revenge. He had never needed anyone's approval. He just needed to be heard. And finally, the world was listening. The weeks that followed were nothing short of unreal for Ethan. One moment he was a nobody playing street corners with a battered keyboard, and the next, he was being called the soul of modern music. Journalists wrote stories about him. Fans sent letters, and strangers stopped him on sidewalks asking for photos. Yet beneath all the attention, something deeper stirred, a quiet pressure building in the background. At first, Ethan tried to stay humble. He still lived in his small apartment, still played his old keyboard, still took the same bus to the studio. But fame has a way of changing the air around you. Not just the people, but the silence itself. It gets heavier. It watches you. Producers started calling daily. Some wanted to upgrade his sound. Others offered sponsorships and expensive equipment. "We can replace that old thing," one of them said, patting the keyboard like it was a child's toy. "Imagine what you could do with real instruments." Ethan just smiled politely. But inside, his chest tightened. He remembered Miles's words. "Don't fix that piano. It's perfect the way it is." He wasn't sure why those words mattered so much, but they did when he met Miles again in the studio. The director looked exhausted. He had been fighting off journalists and rival producers all week, trying to protect Ethan's raw image. "You're hot property now," Miles said, sipping black coffee. "Everyone wants a piece of your story." Ethan nodded quietly. "I don't want to lose what made me start," Miles smirked. "Then hold on to it with both hands." But the turning point came one night during a live charity concert. Ethan had been invited to perform as the final act, sharing the stage with famous artists he'd grown up idolizing. The event hall glittered with gold lights, the crowd buzzing with excitement, cameras pointed from every angle. His heart raced as he stepped on stage. Carrying his old keyboard, a stagehand whispered, "You sure you don't want to use the Steinway Grand?" "It's ready to go." Ethan shook his head. "This is all I need." He set his scratched instrument down, adjusted the mic, and took a deep breath. The host introduced him dramatically, and now, the man whose raw music broke the internet, Ethan Cole. Thunderous applause filled the room. Ethan smiled nervously and began to play. At first, the sound was shaky. The speakers crackled slightly, but within seconds, the melody wrapped around the audience like a warm breeze. His fingers moved like rivers, flowing. Unforced, honest. People stopped recording, just listening, eyes wide, mouths half open. Then suddenly, silence. The lights flickered, a pop echoed. One of the soundboards had overloaded. The audio dropped mid-song. A few people gasped. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Ethan froze. His heart stopped. He pressed another key. Nothing. His beloved keyboard had shorted out. A stagehand rushed forward, whispering, "Switch to the Steinway, quick!" But Ethan didn't move. He just stared at the dark, silent keys. His mind spun. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not here, not now. Then he did something no one expected. He looked up, smiled faintly, and said into the mic, "Looks like it's just you and me now." He placed his hands gently on the broken keyboard and began to hum. It started softly, a tune barely above a whisper. Then he began tapping the dead keys rhythmically, using their muted thuds as percussion. His voice, raw and imperfect, rose above the silence filling the hall. It was haunting, it was real. The audience leaned forward, mesmerized. Some started clapping softly to the rhythm. The cameras captured every second. A man making music from nothing, turning failure into art. Miles stood backstage frozen. His assistant whispered, "He's doing it again." Miles smiled faintly. "No, this time, he's becoming it." When Ethan finished, the hall erupted. The applause didn't just come from admiration. It came from awe. People stood clapping until their hands hurt. The host had tears in his eyes, saying into the mic, "Ladies and gentlemen, that wasn't just music, and that was soul." After the show, journalists flooded backstage. Reporters shouted questions. Flashes exploded around him. Was that planned? Are you signing with Harmony Records? Is your keyboard for sale? Ethan laughed softly, shaking his head. "It's not for sale," he said simply. "It's family." Later, in the quiet dressing room, Miles entered, holding a towel and a bottle of water. "You know, you just made history, right?" Ethan shrugged, smiling tiredly. "It was an accident." Miles shook his head. "No, it was the truth." He paused, eyes softening. "That's what people are hungry for. Something real in a world full of perfect lies." As Ethan looked down at his old keyboard, now cracked from the power surge, he felt a lump in his throat. It was more than an instrument now. It was a story of survival, of pain, of resilience. That night, social media exploded again. Clips of his broken keyboard performance went viral. Hashtags trended. The soul of sound, broken, but beautiful. Ethan Cole Live celebrities shared it. Fans cried over it. Music critics called it the moment art became truth again. But amidst all the praise, one comment stood out beneath the thousands. It was from an anonymous account that simply said, "Your father would be proud." Ethan stared at that line for a long time, his chest tightening. He whispered softly to the empty room, "I hope so." And as dawn broke outside, painting the city gold, Ethan sat beside his broken keyboard, closed his eyes and began to hum again. Not for the fame, not for the cameras, but for the man who taught him how to turn pain into music. The man who once said, "When they laugh at your piano, son, play until they cry," and that's exactly what Ethan did. The morning after the charity concert, the world was still buzzing with Ethan's name. Every major outlet was replaying the moment when his keyboard had died, and how he'd turned silence into music. It was more than just a performance now, it was a movement. People were calling it the sound of humanity, and Ethan, the quiet boy with the broken piano, had become its voice. But behind the applause and headlines, Ethan felt something heavy stirring. It wasn't pride, and it was pressure. For the first time in his life, people expected things from him. The calls from record labels multiplied, sponsorships poured in. Everyone wanted to turn his story into something sellable. When he arrived at Kettering Studios that week, the lobby was crowded with reporters and fans. Flashbulbs popped as he entered. Miles was already inside, pacing, holding his phone to his ear. "Yeah, we'll talk licensing later," Miles said sharply before hanging up. He looked up, smiling. "You've broken the internet again." "Kid," Ethan laughed nervously. "Guess I'm lucky my keyboard broke too." Miles smirked. That moment was lightning in a bottle. Raw, real, impossible to fake. But now we have to protect it. He led Ethan to the conference room where a group of executives sat around a long table. Their smiles were too perfect, their words too smooth. "Ethan," one began, "your story is exactly what the music world needs right now. Authenticity. We want to make a documentary, a brand deal, even a biopic." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "I just want to play." Another executive chuckled. Of course, you'll play and inspire." Miles shot Ethan a look that said, "Be careful." Then he spoke up. "We're not here to turn him into a brand. He's a musician, not a mascot." The room went silent. Tension flickered between Miles and the executives. Finally, one of them smiled tightly and said, "We'll revisit this later." When the meeting ended, Ethan followed Miles into the hallway. "They don't care about the music," Ethan said quietly. Miles sighed. "Most don't. But that's why it's your job to remind them what matters." Ethan nodded. But inside, he wondered if he could, that night, back in his apartment. Ethan sat staring at his old keyboard. The broken keys were taped now, patched with silver strips. He ran his fingers across them gently. The sound was uneven. Some notes worked. Others didn't, but even in its damage, the melody still breathed. He started playing softly, and as he did, he felt his father's presence again. Warm, steady, as if sitting beside him. "Play what you feel, not what they want." He heard his father's voice echo inside his memory. Ethan closed his eyes, and his fingers began to dance across the worn plastic, crafting a new song, one that spoke of fame, loneliness, and the noise that hides behind applause. By morning, the song was complete, imperfect, heartfelt, true. He sent a demo to Miles with a short message. "It's not commercial, but it's real," Miles replied minutes later. "That's why we'll release it." A week later, they recorded it live. No auto-tune, no editing, no grand piano. Just Ethan and his battered keyboard. The song was titled "The Key That Broke," and when it dropped online, it hit like a thunderclap. The lyrics spoke directly to the world that had lifted him up. "You love my pain, but would you still listen if I healed? You praise my cracks, but would you care if I were whole?" It wasn't what the industry expected. It wasn't shiny or radio perfect. But people connected to it instantly. The song climbed the charts, not because it was catchy, but because it was honest. Within days, major stars shared it. Ordinary listeners posted videos of themselves crying to the lyrics. Hashtags spread again. "The Key That Broke." Ethan Cole Unplugged. Ethan didn't realize it yet, but he had just started a quiet revolution in music. Meanwhile, Miles fought behind the scenes. The same executives who had once dismissed Ethan were now furious. He could have made millions if he just followed direction. One shouted during a meeting. Miles slammed his hand on the table. He made something better, truth. But not everyone celebrated Ethan's rise. Some artists who felt overshadowed began whispering online that he was an industry plant.
"No one goes viral that fast without help," one post claimed.
The rumors spread fast, twisting his story into something ugly. The same crowd that had adored him now demanded proof that he was real. Ethan saw the comments late at night. His chest tightened. He didn't know whether to fight back or stay silent. Then he remembered Miles's words, "Protect your truth." So he decided to respond in the only way he knew how. Through music, he announced a small live stream. No sponsors, no promotion, just him and his old keyboard. The title read, "No edits, no filters. Just me." When he went live, only a few hundred viewers joined at first, but as he began to play, the numbers exploded. His voice cracked. His fingers missed notes, yet the emotion was pure. "I don't care about perfection," he said mid-song. "I care about connection." By the time he finished, over 1 million people were watching. The comment section flooded with messages like, "We believe you," and "This is real art." Miles called him right after. His voice choked. "You just silenced the whole internet." "Kid," Ethan laughed softly. "No, I just let them listen." That night, as he sat by the window, city lights twinkling below, he realized something powerful. The fame, the contracts, the cameras, none of it mattered. What mattered was that his story, his music, had finally become bigger than him, and somewhere deep inside, he knew his father was listening too, smiling, proud, whispering the same line that had carried him through every failure and every note. "When they laugh at your piano, son, just play." The world now knew Ethan Cole not as a viral musician, but as something rarer, a truth-teller in a world of noise. His songs weren't about fame or glitter. They were about life, loss, and the small, honest beauty that hides inside broken things. Still, success came with shadows, and the higher he climbed, the more people tried to pull him down. Ethan was invited to perform at an international music festival, a dream event in New York City where legends had played. The invitation came with a promise. Millions will be watching live. It was his biggest stage yet, and everyone expected him to perform "The Key That Broke," the song that had shaken the internet. Miles was proud but nervous. "This is the moment. Kid," he told Ethan in the car ride to the venue. "But remember, big lights come with big traps." Ethan smiled softly. I'm not worried about traps, I'm worried about losing the reason I play. Miles chuckled. That's exactly why you won't lose it. The festival grounds buzzed with chaos, rows of cameras, screaming fans, banners with Ethan's face on them. Some fans held up cardboard signs that read, "Play the broken key," and "Never fix the piano." It was surreal. Ethan had dreamed of audiences like this, but the noise was almost too much. Backstage, assistants ran back and forth. Sound engineers checked equipment, and Miles argued with producers who wanted Ethan to use a brand new grand piano. "It'll look better on camera," one insisted. "That old thing doesn't match the stage setup," Miles snapped. "That old thing is the setup." Ethan placed a hand on his shoulder. Calm as ever. "It's okay, Miles, let me handle it." When his turn came, Ethan stepped onto the massive stage, blinding lights hitting his face.
He placed his weathered keyboard in the center.
Its cracks visible even from the front row. The audience went quiet. He took a deep breath and began to play. The first note was pure magic. The sound rippled across the crowd like a heartbeat. Even through the digital noise of the festival speakers, his emotion broke through. He wasn't playing notes anymore. He was painting with memory. Every chord told his story. From his father's laughter to the night the keyboard went silent on stage. But midway through the performance, something unexpected happened. A strong wind gust swept across the stage, knocking over one of the mic stands. A cable tangled around Ethan's foot. The sound glitched, a harsh, static burst blared through the speakers. The audience gasped. He froze for a second, feeling the old fear crawl back. Then he saw her. In the front row, a little girl, maybe 8 years old, holding up a cardboard sign. "My dad says your music helped him stop drinking." Ethan's eyes softened. The crowd faded away. The pressure vanished. He smiled, bent down, fixed the wire, and said into the mic, "Don't worry, broken things still work." The audience cheered. He sat again, tapped the broken key gently, and continued to play, but this time he added something new, a soft humming, almost like a whisper to his younger self. The wind carried his voice into the night sky. When he finished, the stadium erupted. People chanted his name. Tears in their eyes, the little girl waved. Her sign trembling in her hands, Ethan waved back, smiling through the lights. After the show, backstage was chaos again. Reporters shouting, producers celebrating. Miles pushing through to reach him. "You did it again," Miles said, grabbing Ethan's shoulders. "You turned a mistake into magic." Ethan laughed quietly. Maybe mistakes are just chances wearing rough edges. Later that night, Ethan sat on the roof of his hotel, the city skyline glowing below. He placed his keyboard beside him, the same one that had survived every storm. He played softly to himself, letting the night breeze carry the sound over the buildings. It was a new melody, slower, more reflective. Like a conversation with the past, he thought about his father, about those nights in the small apartment when they had no money, only music. He thought about the humiliation of that first audition, and how that single cruel laugh had pushed him to find something deeper inside. His phone buzzed. It was Leah, his old friend. "Ethan," she said, her voice trembling. "Did you see the news?" He frowned. "What happened?" "They're calling your performance the best moment of the festival. You're trending again, but this time globally. You're the #1 artist in the world." Ethan leaned back, staring at the stars. "#1, he whispered. It didn't sound real. Leah laughed through the phone. "Your dad would have said, 'See? I told you that broken piano had power.'" Ethan smiled. "He would have said it still needs tuning." When the call ended, Ethan stayed on the roof, watching the city lights flicker like tiny stage lamps. He realized something he hadn't before. The world wasn't really listening to him. They were listening to what he made them feel. That was his gift, his purpose, his quiet revenge against every laugh, every rejection. Down below, fans were already gathering at the hotel entrance, chanting his name. But up there, alone with his music, Ethan didn't feel like a celebrity. He felt like that same boy again, the one who just wanted to make his father proud. He placed his hand on the broken key and pressed it gently. The sound was faint, imperfect, but it carried all the warmth in the world. And as the night wind moved around him, Ethan whispered, "Dad, I didn't fix it. I just learned how to play through the cracks far away." The city kept moving, the lights kept flashing, and millions of people replayed his performance online. But Ethan didn't need to watch. He already knew. The world had finally stopped laughing at his piano and started listening to his soul. The weeks after the New York festival felt like a blur. Cameras, interviews, late-night talk shows, and endless lights flashing in Ethan's face. Reporters called him the man who healed the music industry, while fans called him the broken key. Everyone wanted to know the secret behind his magic, but Ethan didn't have one. All he had was truth, and a keyboard that refused to die. Still, the fame that once felt like a dream began to feel like a trap. His schedule overflowed. His team, a group of professionals assigned by the record label, decided everything for him, from what he wore to what he said on camera. They told him to smile more, to avoid political topics, to play the viral songs and skip the slow ones. People don't want sad stories, one of the managers said. They want miracles, Ethan nodded politely. But deep down, something inside him was cracking. He missed the days when it was just him, his father's voice in his head, and his old keyboard echoing through a quiet apartment. One morning, he walked into a meeting where Miles was waiting with two executives. The tension was thick. Papers were spread across the table, tour contracts, sponsorship deals, and promotional shoots. Miles looked up, his jaw tight. "Ethan, they want to redesign your image," Ethan frowned. "Redesign?" The younger executive smiled. "Nothing major, just modern touches. Maybe swap the old keyboard for a sleek, grand, cleaner sound. New brand partnerships." Miles slammed his hand on the table. "He is the brand. That old keyboard is the story." The older executive leaned back calmly. "Stories evolve, Mr. Kettering. Nostalgia doesn't pay forever." Ethan watched them argue, feeling both invisible and trapped. The words swirled around him. Marketable, relatable, profitable. They spoke about him like a product, not a person. Finally, he stood up, voice quiet but firm. "I won't change my sound." The room fell silent. Ethan looked at Miles. "If that means losing everything, I'm okay with that." He left before anyone could answer. The city outside felt colder than usual. People recognized him on the street, shouting his name, asking for photos. But all he wanted was silence that night. He returned to his apartment, the one he refused to leave despite being able to afford a mansion now. The walls were still cracked, the curtains still thin, and his keyboard sat in its usual corner. Waiting, he sat down, closed his eyes, and began to play. The melody that came out was raw and unfamiliar. It wasn't about pain or victory, and it was about peace. Hours passed, dawn creeping through the window. Then, without realizing it, Ethan began recording. The track came out in a single take, no edits, no plan. He titled it Quiet Rooms and uploaded it himself. Without telling the label, by the next morning, the internet had exploded again. Fans said it was his most powerful song yet, a return to his roots. "It feels like he's talking to his father again," one comment read. "It's not a performance anymore, and it's a prayer," wrote another. But the label wasn't happy. His manager called, furious. "Ethan, you can't just release music without clearance." Ethan replied calmly, "It wasn't for charts. It was for me," and hung up. Miles called a few minutes later, his voice low. "You've started a storm, kid, but I'm proud of you." Ethan smiled. "I just played what I felt," Miles chuckled. "And that's exactly why you're unstoppable." The next week, something unexpected happened. A young boy uploaded a video playing Quiet Rooms on a toy keyboard in his small bedroom. His caption read, "My family can't afford lessons, but I learned from Ethan Cole's videos." That single clip went viral again. Not because of Ethan, but because of what he inspired. Soon, thousands of children from around the world started uploading their versions. Some played beautifully, others offbeat, but all of them carried the same emotion. Sincerity. Ethan watched in silence as the trend spread. He scrolled through hundreds of videos, tears in his eyes. This was what his father had meant all along. Music wasn't about fame. It was about connection, about teaching hearts how to speak. Then one day Miles called again, voice trembling with emotion. "Ethan, you're not going to believe this. The United Nations just invited you to perform at their annual Peace Gala." Ethan froze. "The UN? Why me?" Miles laughed. "Because they said your music unites people better than speeches." When the night came, the grand hall shimmered with gold and glass. World leaders sat side by side waiting. Ethan carried his battered keyboard across the stage. Ignoring the whispers, the microphone buzzed softly as he adjusted it. He smiled at the audience and said, "This piano isn't perfect, but it's honest. And so is this song." Then he began to play. The melody floated like smoke, soft yet unstoppable. Every note carried pieces of every person who had ever listened to him. Every broken heart, every quiet dream. It wasn't just Ethan anymore, it was all of them. Together, by the end, the hall was silent, then slowly, the applause began, hesitant at first, then thunderous. Some leaders wiped tears from their eyes. Others simply stood, clapping with both hands. When he walked off stage, Miles met him with a proud smile. "You didn't just play tonight," he said softly. "You healed something in them." Ethan looked down at his old keyboard, still scratched, still cracked yet glowing faintly under the stage lights. He smiled. "Funny, isn't it?" Miles tilted his head. "What?" "That something broken could bring the world together." Outside the hall, the city lights of New York shimmered. People around the world streamed the performance live, posting captions like, "The broken key healed us all," and somewhere, maybe in the same place where music goes when it's done right, a proud father's spirit smiled and whispered, "That's my boy." The night after the United Nations performance, Ethan sat alone in his hotel room overlooking the New York skyline. The city was glowing below, camera flashes still flickering somewhere in the distance. His name was everywhere again, television, newspapers, social media, trending across continents, but for the first time, the noise didn't excite him, it humbled him, it made him quiet. He turned off his phone, opened the window, and let the city breeze in. The soft hum of traffic mixed with the faint echo of applause from earlier. He smiled faintly. "We did it, Dad," he whispered to the night. His old keyboard sat on the table, scratched and weary, yet somehow shining under the lamplight. It had been through everything with him, the laughter, the humiliation, the silence, the victory, and the rebirth. He touched one of the cracked keys gently, feeling the rough edge beneath his finger. "You held on longer than I did," he murmured. He thought of the first day he carried it into that audition room. How people had mocked it, how Miles had scoffed, how the world had turned that moment into something unforgettable. A knock came on the door. It was Miles holding 2 cups of coffee. His hair looked even grayer under the hotel lights, but his smile was soft. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. Ethan laughed. "How could I?" "You saw the crowd." Miles handed him a cup and sat down beside him. "I saw more than the crowd, kid. I saw something I've never seen before. Unity. Not for money, not for fame, just soul." They sat in silence for a while, sipping coffee and watching the lights fade as dawn approached. Then Miles said quietly, "You know what's funny? When I first met you, I thought you'd never make it past that audition." Ethan smiled. "You told me my keyboard was a joke," Miles chuckled. "And I've never been happier to be wrong." Ethan looked out the window, voice soft. "I think my dad forgave you." Miles nodded, eyes misting. "I think so too." The next few days were unreal. The world replayed Ethan's UN performance endlessly. Headlines read, "From Mockery to Miracle, the broken key that united the world." Ethan Cole, the man who played for peace. People in war-torn countries shared his song under the hashtag #PlayForPeace. Street musicians covered his melodies in different languages, and children across continents learned to play his tunes on plastic keyboards. His music wasn't just art anymore, and it was a language. Yet amid the glory, Ethan stayed grounded. He visited hospitals where kids were learning piano on broken instruments. He told them, "Don't wait for a better one. Play with what you have." The kids smiled, their laughter echoing the same spirit his father once had. One afternoon, while visiting a small community center in Harlem, an old man approached him, his hands trembling. "Son," he said softly, "I used to teach piano before arthritis took my fingers, but when I heard your music, I started teaching again, through my voice." Ethan smiled warmly. "That's what it's for." Days turned into weeks, and the movement kept growing, but Ethan didn't chase it. He played where he wanted, sometimes in big halls, sometimes on street corners just to feel the ground beneath his feet again. He refused brand deals that tried to turn his story into merchandise. "You can't sell sincerity," he'd tell them with a grin. One evening, while performing at a small open-air event for charity, the lights suddenly dimmed and a large screen flickered on behind him. It was a clip from his first audition, the moment Miles had said, "You call that a piano?" The audience gasped. Then the video faded into his latest UN performance. The contrast was staggering, from laughter to thunderous applause. When the video ended, Ethan turned to the crowd and said softly, "That day, I learned something important. People can laugh at your instrument, your dream, even your voice, but they can't silence your purpose. They can't rewrite your truth." The audience erupted in applause, tears in their eyes. After the show, Miles met him backstage. "You've turned your pain into a mirror. Kid," he said proudly, "when people look at you, they see themselves." Ethan smiled. "Then maybe that's what music's supposed to do." Months passed, and Ethan announced a global project called Keys for Hope, donating affordable instruments to underprivileged kids around the world. Each keyboard came with a small engraving. "Broken doesn't mean useless." The campaign went viral instantly, even drawing support from global artists and philanthropists. In every country, from India to Brazil, children played his songs. School choirs performed The Key That Broke in dozens of languages. It was no longer his story. It was everyone's one night. While flying home from Tokyo after a charity performance, Ethan looked out the plane window at the stars. The clouds shimmered like quiet oceans below. He felt a warmth in his chest, and not pride but peace. He closed his eyes and saw his father again, sitting on that rickety wooden stool years ago, smiling as Ethan stumbled through his first melody. "Not bad, son," his father's voice echoed in his mind. "Just remember, a true musician doesn't play for applause. He plays for healing." Ethan smiled in his sleep, whispering, "I get it now, Dad." When the plane landed, the airport was filled with fans and children holding signs. "Thank you for the music. You helped me speak again. I fixed my heart with your song." Ethan didn't rush past them. He stopped for every hug, every handshake, every tear. Later, as the crowd cleared, a small boy approached quietly, clutching a tiny cracked toy piano. "Mr. Ethan," the boy said shyly, "my dad fixed this for me. But one key doesn't work." Ethan knelt, smiling gently. "That's okay," he said, pressing the broken key softly. "Sometimes the best songs come from the ones that don't work." The boy grinned, and Ethan walked away, his heart full that night. As he performed his final song at his farewell concert, the stage lights dimmed, and the crowd lit up thousands of tiny candles. Each flicker danced like a heartbeat. He played slowly, lovingly, his old keyboard still by his side, and when the final note echoed into silence, Ethan whispered into the mic, "Thank you for listening to the sound of something broken." The crowd rose to their feet, clapping, crying, cheering, and somewhere, unseen but deeply felt, a father's spirit clapped too, smiling in the quiet glow, proud of his son who had turned laughter into legacy, pain into poetry, and music into peace.